Hello, America. Welcome to your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the happily retired Chief Mark Garrett. Joining us today is the happily retired Special Agent in Charge, Los Angeles Field Office of the DEA, Bill Bodner, great friend of ours. And make sure, by the way, you're checking out his podcast. You'll see me. There's a permanent co-host, and that is Truth Nation, a fantastic podcast. And the reason I invited Bill on today is because, as you see on his podcast, he's one of the most analytical, I say objective guys that I know. And so, Bill, welcome to the show today.
Good to be here, Mark.
It is good to be here, and why we need your objectivity and your analytical skills is to help us figure out what happened in Los Angeles County and what is happening in Los Angeles County, my old county of residence. We'll talk about that pretty soon. But these fires are, for any of us, whether you have never been in public service, law enforcement, public safety, whether you have been like we were for so many decades, they're really beyond description and belief. It's certainly a tragedy of unbelievable proportion. And I know that you and Anthony and Vince in the background there are still in Southern California, but you specifically in Los Angeles County and in Vince, Los Angeles County. Vince, very close to the fires where you are. There's so much to talk about. And before we went on air here, we were talking offline that there's a million ways we can go with this and things to cover, and it's really too much for multiple podcasts. But we want to do this best we can to really dig deep into the human side and into the operational side as well with this. Sid, you're there now. I know you were in the South Bay, Bill, and just from someone on the ground, really fairly close to this. Tell us what's going on from your perspective.
I think a little calmer this morning. The wind has not been as bad the past couple of days. Authorities have been able to get a little bit of a handle on most of the fires. Devastation, and Mark, this has obviously been a big topic in the news, and there's been some critique of people discussing what happened before we're, quote, out of the woods. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to call it Monday morning quarterbacking, but looking at what happened while the crisis is still ongoing. And one thing that I think is important to mention is that this is the worst Southern California fire, right? But it's not the first. I think you were probably still the chief when we had the huge Sepulveda Pass fire in 2018, very close to where this fire was. And after that, Mark, there was talk about we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do better in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll get into some of those things. And those things were not done. And we find ourselves in the same position again. So I think to some extent, although this is an ongoing thing and we both know people personally that have been impacted, it's fair to start looking at what happened and do our part to make sure this doesn't happen again.
You talked about Sepulveda Pass and fires there. And actually, I was an assistant chief. It wasn't too long before I promoted. And so many fires. It's of my time in the Highway Patrol and in management, there are too many really to articulate, which goes to your point, Bill, about, here in Florida, you got hurricanes, and generally with hurricanes, you have a pretty good advance notice they're coming. You get this depression and turns into a storm and turns to a hurricane, and you can really prepare not only in general for response, but you can actually, fortify certain areas with predictions of the path. That specificity is not available with a situation like this. However, again, to your point, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how big, under what circumstances these fires are going to happen. That's all there is to it. And so we know they're coming. Also, to your point about Sepulveda and that west side of Los Angeles, I want to be clear. We all know that there are multiple fires burning now, but generally speaking, for purposes of this discussion today, we're talking about the Palisades fire and then the Eden Canyon fire. And the Eden fire, it primarily, not exclusively, but hit Altadena, my former town. We're going to talk about it. Also hit Sierra Madre, parts of Pasadena, Monrovia, La Cañada. That whole area is still in trouble, although I think things are getting under control, so to speak, in that area. But with that said, I want to start off with this very short video. And let's put it this way. We moved from almost the exact ignition point of the Eden fire a year and a half ago. We left there. Anthony just put on the screen our old house. And the emotions are probably running as high for me as they can for someone who didn't lose their current home. But what you're seeing is that is until we moved here to Florida, that was the only home that my son knew. He cried the day that we left. He went to his bedroom and he stood there and he sobbed because it was the only home and it was the only bedroom of his own that he had known. It's very difficult to leave. The reason I say that it's as close to home as possible is because, Anthony, I want you to go ahead and when I tell you to start panning, go ahead and play the video. I'll tell you in a second. But as this video pans to the right, I want you to notice what's not there. And what's not there is the home of two of our best friends in the world. I won't share their names, but they came just to visit here just about 3 months ago, our home in Florida. That's how close we are. And like the home you see there, my son did a lot of growing up in their house. He became best friends with their granddaughter, who's about the same age as he is. And this is from the time they're about 4 years old to 9 years old. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it, that he spent so many nights there, so many days in their pool. We all spent so many great evenings together over great dinners and adult beverages and Easters and Christmas we shared in both houses. And Anthony, go ahead and play it, but I want you to see what happened to the two of our best friends in the world's house and how our house somehow stood. That's what's left of some of my happiest memories. Across the street, there's a school burned to the ground. Across the street from us, a neighbor survived. That house to our east, to the left on the screen, burned to the ground. That home, you can let it keep playing, but that's our neighbors there. It's the two of our best friends gone. You can see we shared a fence. We built that fence together. We split the cost in that fence. We were just soulmates, the four of us, really the six of us, with our son and their granddaughter. And we're in communication with them now. That house, the last frame you see in that video, the house to the east, or frame left here, owned by a woman who actually ran a very, very large home, ran a rehabilitation service for elderly patients in her house, a very, very large house. I spoke with her daughter last night, and she just said, "Mom's okay," and sent a teary-eyed emoji. She said, "Mark, all she has are the clothes that she had on her back when she left. That's the only thing she has left." She had been there for, I forget how long, decades. Our friends to screen right had been there for 52 years in that home. And it just, again, I could go on and on about this, but, and again, somehow our old house there, it's a tinderbox. It's a wood frame house. It's under 9 gigantic oak trees. I was always afraid that we're going to go up like, kindling in the next wildfire. And somehow, for some reason, that house stood, and so many around. To give you a little perspective about this, I have another friend about 1 block away, beautiful, large home, gone. She didn't know, and for about 2 days afterwards, her house is gone. All she got her cat and her laptop. She was gone. Her house is razed. She's about 2 doors down, just so everybody knows by perspective. For those of you who are old enough, the old series 90210, the house you would see in the opening scene of that was supposed to be in Beverly Hills. That was a few doors down from her house. So about a block and a half from where we are right there. This is the neighborhood. Just so you know, we're about 1,400 feet elevation. We're literally about 2 blocks from Angeles National Forest, and we're about a mile and a half from the ignition point, we believe, of the Eden fire. I put this up here because although I know Palisades very, very well, I lived here in Altadena near the Eden fire, right in the middle of the Eden fire, and wanted to share with everybody that I want to be careful of my sensitivities about this, about the personal side. But it is impossible on a show like this with someone like Bill Bodner and myself, who spent so many years serving the people of the United States and people of California, respectively, that we cannot examine and talk about leadership or lack thereof and accountability. It's impossible, and it would be a shortcoming on our part if we didn't address those things. So I just want to share that with everybody. Bill, I know I won't use his last name, but I talked to Brian. You sent me information. It's a mutual friend of Bill and mine, and another gentleman who was in public service for years. He lost everything, Bill, and I know you probably in contact with him as well.
Yeah. I'm Mark. There's somebody I've known for, actually, he's responsible for me being a DEA agent. I've known him since before I started working at DEA, so 35 years. And man, to hear his story about getting out and the difficulties in just getting out of the fire area, and another story where he did not get out with too much. The clothes on his back, kind of, and some papers, and
that's it.
Yeah.
Well, so Bill and I think everybody on here, a lot of people listening to the show, is what I mean, may have known people that have lost everything, but we certainly do. And by the way, we still know people, I do, that are under evacuation orders. They still don't know the necessarily the fate of their properties. By the way, I was able to determine for some people out there, because of my contacts with Highway Patrol, it was really wonderful. I was able to let people know, hey, your house is okay. It survived. And in some cases, just like mine, where everything around it burned down, but their house survived. So those were good communications I had. But as I said, Bill, we can't separate the personal from the operational, the professional, the accountability side of this. And one of the things when unforeseen, and I use that word quotes, we're going to get into this, when specific incidents happen, it's your job as a leader, it's our job as leaders to talk, to answer questions, to show responsibility, to provide as much information as reasonable. And I know people have seen this, and I want to talk about this, Bill. I find it shocking. What we're going to see in this video, it actually happened from a leadership point of view. And Anthony, can you go ahead and play clip 2? This is going to be Mayor Bass, Los Angeles City. So we're going from the Eden fire, now we're going to the city of Los Angeles, 2 different entities, one's county and one city. This is Mayor Bass of Los Angeles, and this upon her return from Africa. We'll talk about that from the shindig that she went to, returning to, I assume, Los Angeles International Airport, and she's confronted from a reporter. Anthony, go ahead and hit play.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today? Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today? Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position? Madam Mayor, have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today who are dealing with this disaster? No apology for them? Do you think you should have been visiting Ghana while this was unfolding back home?
I don't know. Come on. We do it as a right to do it. That they ask for more than this.
Madam Mayor, let me ask you just again, have you anything to say to the citizens today as you return?
Ma'am, hold on 1 second.
Madam Mayor, just a few words for the citizens today as you return to deal with the catastrophe.
As you can see, that's from the New York Post. And Bill, I'm going to clam up and I'm going to give you first crack at this one.
You have to say something, Mark. You know, you have to say something, and I get it. You've been on a plane. You probably aren't too dialed into what's going on, but you can't just ignore the questions, especially since later she claimed she was in the loop and knew exactly, you know, on her flight back, she said she was on the phone constantly talking to the chiefs of police, the fire chiefs. You can't arrive and then not say a thing. It's just not professional. You have to say something and give the people of LA some comfort that you're actually in charge. You're going to be leading the fight. You know what's going on. You have a plan, and it's time to start executing. That's all she really had to do there, and she didn't do it.
I simply couldn't agree more, Bill. I mean, that's why I threw my hands up saying this is you nailed it. And I went right to the same thing, that she made such a big deal that she was in communication with authorities in Los Angeles. If you notice something, you know, on the way back, if you notice something, of course, she's surrounded by staff coming off the plane. You would think that somebody, and maybe they did, someone would say, listen, Madam Mayor, we need to have some type of a statement ready to go. In other words, she has staff with her. Somebody either told her we need to prepare a statement and she declined to take that advice, or no one advised her to prepare a statement and she wasn't bright enough to do it herself. Either way, to me, this is a canary in the coal mine, and I think it's an understatement of her lack of ability to lead. These are basic, fundamental steps to take in a leadership role. My God, even as a first line supervisor, PIO, you will say, listen, I have to defer to my boss, but let me tell you right now that Highway Patrol, the DEA is blah, blah, blah. Something, as you said, we're going to get you information. Once we have it, we understand the tragedy, the scale of this tragedy, whatever it is, you can have a canned answer. But to sit there and to ignore, stone-faced ignore the media, it breeds absolute contempt for people in charge, and specifically her. And further, Bill, as I said, it's you can be a first-line supervisor and do much better than Mayor Bass did, and she is the boss. There is no one telling her, oh, you better go ahead and clear whatever statements you have to say. It's one thing if you were a press secretary and say, listen, I've got to talk to the mayor first. I don't want to give her erroneous information, blah, 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 whatever. I can't speak for the mayor. Even that's a statement. But there's no one for her to answer to as far as a chain of command. She is the boss. You would think, listen, this is why I came back. We need to get on this. I've been in communication. But she had nothing. And this is a disgrace. And again, I think it exemplifies the complete lack of confidence, at least at the city level, starting with the mayor.
I mean, the term deer in the headlights, I feel a little bit like that's what I saw there, where it's just overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. And a lot of times, Mark, you know, I guess how you can tell someone's leadership ability is they need to have everything scripted. Everything needs to be scripted. It needs to be kind of rehearsed and a polished statement. Um, you don't need to do that. If you're a real leader, you can speak from the heart. You know enough about what's going on to capture the important key pieces and put it out there to the public and give the public confidence that you're going to get out of this okay. And you know, we just didn't see that.
No, we didn't see it. You know, and to that point, Bill, you know, going back, you know, before that airport incident there, she and all the authorities were warned that what happened was a real possibility.
That's a great point, Mark.
And she was given specific information about the red flag conditions that were coming. And she knew that the winds were not just any ordinary Santa Ana winds, that these were, I won't say once in a lifetime, because I've actually lived through 100-mile-an-hour winds right there, that house you saw early in the video. But thank God for us at the time, they weren't accompanied by fire, which turned everything into a blowtorch. But she knew that the Santa Ana winds were coming, coupled with extremely dry conditions. And you would think that she would know what the resources and capabilities of her own fire department and partner agencies would be. And if she realized the potential, if she had considered the potential, she would, well, I don't know if she wouldn't, maybe she did consider it and she went anyway, but she made a decision to leave a city under enormous threat of danger to attend an event in another country where she has an ancillary role. It just seems so unbecoming of the mayor of the second largest city in the country. I mean, and I'm going to say this is, forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, this sounds self-serving. It's just factual. I can tell you right now, my last Thanksgiving in California, when I was still a chief in Southern Division, California Highway Patrol, I missed Thanksgiving meal with my family and friends because I proactively went down to a scene that I wasn't ordered to go to because I was afraid it was going to blow up into a complete S show.
Right.
I left because that was my job. That was my job. I didn't want to go.
Right.
I was tired of doing all types of things for the last 6 months with the riots and COVID and things like this. And this was another incident. I told my wife, I said, Michelle, I got to go to, I know you got, and she like, I know, I figured you have to go.
Yep.
And I got back late. I ate late. They had to wait for me, things like this. But these are things that people in leadership positions should be doing, and they're sworn to do, and she did not do them.
Mark, there's any promotion exam that I've ever taken in public service, there's usually a question about delegation. You're given a bunch of tasks, and which one do you delegate and which one do you handle yourself? And that's a basic skill to be able to discern what is more important, what do I need to do now? And I think that's probably where one of the issues was with this. She was needed at home. The mayor of the city of Los Angeles was needed at home last Monday and Tuesday.
Yes, she was. By the way, this is January 6th, just so everybody knows. Ahead of extreme fire weather expected Tuesday and Wednesday in Los Angeles, Ventura, and San Diego counties, Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services. Yeah, OES is Office of Emergency Services, is positioning dozens of fire engines, dozers, helicopters, and specialized personnel to support local firefighting efforts. So that's the state side.
And that's before there was a fire, Mark.
That's before there was a fire. And OES reports directly to the governor's office. and Highway Patrol works very closely with Cal OES. But in other words, to that point, as far as OES is concerned, Cal OES, they had done everything, I assume, in their ability with their resources to prepare. But that should have been a red flag, pardon the use of that term, but a red flag to the mayor. Oh my God, I just can't go. And by the way, again, I open this up saying, I want to be sensitive to the tens of thousands of people who are affected, who've lost homes, businesses, or both, everything they own. But just from a political point of view, it will take out the operational responsibility, all those things. This is a case where Mayor Bass could have easily said, everybody, I need for you to be prepared. I need for you to do this. We want you to do this. We want you to take all precautions, pack all of your important belongings, things that your irreplaceable items, blah, 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 whatever. What I'm doing, I am telling the president, because it's part of a presidential function or whatever, I'm telling President Biden, I cannot go to Ghana. I have to stay here in preparation of the possibility we're going to face extraordinary times. That's what a leader does. And by the way, it's what a good politician does. If you want to play politics in her favor, that's something she could have done that would have bolstered her, I think, her image with the public. And it was complete dereliction of duty, and was a complete waste of an opportunity for her to do the right thing from that point of view as well.
I agree.
In my opinion.
I agree.
Now, Bill, we talked about, again, offline about the next clip we're going to show. And I find it at least as extraordinary as the previous clip, but on the other end of the spectrum. And this is, and Anthony, you can pull it up. Don't play it yet, but you can go ahead and prep it. This is LA City Fire Chief Kristen Crowley. Now, Kristen Crowley, I think she's been there, about 3 years or so, Bill, as a fire chief. Now, she's come under fire, and I won't get into it. She's come under fire for some other positions that she has and other strategies, things like this. But I'll tell you what, Bill and I were talking again offline, being in high positions with very large agencies and organizations, and watching this fire chief here. She's been being interviewed by Good Day LA, a local program, and obviously in Los Angeles. It's a 15-minute interview. We're not going to play the whole thing. We're going to play 2 relatively short clips. But I want you to watch this first clip. And Bill, we'll stop it there. And Anthony, that's from 125 to 323. I want you guys to watch this clip. We'll stop it there, and then Bill and I will talk about it. Go ahead, Anthony.
What my firefighters need.
And those lives are on the line. So let's get to the big question, the budget. There's so much talk about it. It was cut 17 million. It was cut this. It wasn't cut at all, according to one newspaper. Was your budget for the fiscal year 2024-2025 cut?
I can tell you, I'm going to even go back further than that. Again, since day one, we've identified huge gaps in regard to our service delivery and our ability from our firefighters, boots on the ground, to do their jobs. Since day one, this is my 3rd budget as we're going into 25-26. What I can tell you is we are still understaffed, we're still under-resourced, and we're still underfunded. So with that, whether it's 7 million, 10 million.
But was the budget cut, Chief?
Yes, it was cut. And it did impact our ability to provide service.
Let's talk about that memo. You sent a memo, a scathing memo, to the Board of Fire Commissioners where you expressed your concern that you were not going to be able to do your job. Your firefighters would not be able to respond adequately to a major emergency like a wildfire, like what we're seeing right now.
Right. So understanding where our services gaps are, number one, is understanding where our firefighters need in regard to their equipment. Now, let's focus back on what our people need, and what they need to be is properly funded and equipped. Whether it's 7 million or not, it doesn't matter. It impacts our ability, just like you said with the board report, of our ability to provide service, and that's on a normal day. Our firefighters are running over 1,500 calls. They're transporting 650 patients a day on a normal day, let alone the last 3 days of what we've had with significant impacts that have changed the communities that we serve their lives forever. So with that, we're going to continue to fight for what we need to. That is my job as the fire chief of the best fire department in the world.
Bill, I asked the previous one. I love to hear your analysis on this. Take the first crack at this one as well.
She's bold. That's a bold statement to make. I mean, when I heard, and Mark, do you mind if I read the memo real quick?
Absolutely not. Please do.
Yes. So I have the December 4th memo that they kind of panned to, and that's the one that's really been at issue. The Los Angeles City Fire Department is facing unprecedented operational challenges due to the elimination of critical civilian positions and a $7 million reduction in overtime variable staffing hours. And I'll get back to that term in a second. These budgetary reductions have adversely affected the department's ability to maintain core operations such as technology, communication infrastructure, payroll processing, training, fire prevention, and community education. In addition to these impacts, the reduction in V hours has severely limited the department's capacity to prepare for, train for, and respond to large-scale emergencies, including wildfires, earthquakes, hazardous material incidents, and large public events. Specialized programs and resources such as air operations, tactical EMS units, disaster response, and community emergency response teams, which rely heavily on V hours, are now at risk of reduced effectiveness. It takes, now I don't know the circumstances around that. If this was something that she just got frustrated and said, my people cannot do their job, I need to make the city government aware of it, and wrote that memo, that's a courageous move, Mark. I've been in positions where the resources for my office were cut significantly. And when I got to the decision makers in Washington, D.C. and asked them, the quote was, well, where else do you want me to take the money from? Right? Now, the memos I could have written about that, you know what I mean? Being a hub city for drugs, and someone tells me, well, where else do you want me to take the money from? Well, I don't know, but maybe not from one of the main transshipment centers for drugs coming into the United States. But you do have, I don't know, a desire, an obligation, an awareness that you have to kind of protect your agency and the reputation of your agency. The credit I give to Crowley here is that she just said the facts. We don't have the money to do the job. We're not getting the money to do the job. And I think there was even an additional part to that clip where there was a really poignant question mark. Something like, what was it, Mark?
It's coming.
The city,
it's coming.
Okay, my bad. Well, that's my thoughts. That was a bold move by her. Yeah. And the reality is, myself, unless there was something behind it and I was asked to write the memo by someone, I probably would not have done it.
Yeah. And Bill, you bring a great point about, in other words, was it strictly proactive on her part to write this memos? And we don't know. In other words, you and I have both been in position, and you just made that clear a minute ago, about writing memorandums in response to request from a superior of, what do you need, or what's your proposed budget? And this is what we had to do all the time, the highway patrol division level. What's your proposed budget for next year? What do you want? And then, of course, you get a response saying, yeah, fat chance, here's what you're getting. So you write a lot of these memos about resources. In other words, here's the number of personnel I want, coming out of the academy. I need more cadets coming down here. I need more patrol cars. We need more, you name it. We need this, we need this, we need this. We need to increase overtime. And that's one thing. But to write it proactively, just saying, hey, I'm looking at stuff and you guys have your head up your ass, because we're going to be in trouble in a situation like this. And as you read, Bill, she included wildfires as one of the potential situations they could not handle, given the lack of resources they have, given the reduction of budget personnel. Later on in that interview, by the way, or some point in the interview, she talks about the reduction in actual fire stations. They have fewer fire stations now than they did 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years ago. But there's been a reduction in fired stations. The other thing you read in there, Bill, either you editorialized or she said it, but either way, it's so important in this conversation. There was a discussion of core operations. I believe that might have been in the memo that she wrote. Core operations. In other words, it's not just LA City Fire or whatever agency or government entity you're talking about. So many of these agencies are not fulfilling or focusing on their core missions. We talked about that in the Highway Patrol all the time. Our core mission is traffic enforcement. It's a safe, efficient movement of people in the state of California. Now, the Highway Patrol has a lot of ancillary duties now, there's no doubt about it, but the core mission remains traffic. And when we start getting away from core missions, things begin to get watered down. That's all there is to it. You're not going to be as efficient or effective in doing XYZ if you're doing XYZ, ABC, ML, all of these things. The other thing, and this is happening, by the way, and I know I'm not articulating what those things are, but there are concerns that so many agencies are doing things they don't need to be doing. They're not using taxpayer money efficiently, and as far as I'm concerned, ethically. The other thing in that video, we talked about the memo and memorandums, whether or not she wrote those proactively or they were a response. But one thing that she did do, I can tell you right now, my rear end would have been in a ringer, is she actually laid those memos out for the world to see, for that reporter, cameraman to tape. Now, again, maybe those memorandums have been made public at some previous time. I don't think so, because there is the discussion about one memorandum in there that was leaked. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming, based on that, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that those memorandums were not for, at this point at least, for public examination. You can get these things through, Public Records Act. I understand that, but I don't think that those were meant for the public to see right now. She laid them all out as evidence of what she has been communicating with her superiors, including the fire. I think it's a fire commission and city council and mayor's office and things like that. So as to your point, Bill, yes, she's courageous, and whatever anybody else thinks about her in any other arena, I'm telling you right now, I give this woman a lot of credit.
Yeah. And Mark, I want to talk a little bit about smoke and mirrors in budgets, because you brought up a very key term, the core mission, or what did you call it? The core operations. Core operations. So, here's a question. The fire department got a 3% pay raise, right? So that incurred an additional $53 million of salary. So let's say the fire department gets a $40 million budget increase. Well, that's not enough to even cover the salary increase that the union negotiated. And, actually it was not, in my opinion, exorbitant. It was 3% a year, I think, over 4 years, Mark.
Yeah. I think
basically so. Cost of living are below right now.
Mm-hmm.
So when the city says, no, the budget actually grew, the amount of money funding the actual entity, the fire department, might have grown, but that salary expense is gone immediately. And what is happening to core operations? And that variable overtime, is something that the chief has identified as being key to addressing these emergency situations. And that's where they apparently are sucking the money from, to make up the salary differences or do these other things. So when salary increases, sometimes core operations, that sometimes they're hurt by this. So I just bring that up to say there's been a lot of talk, and I think you brought it up already, finger pointing. No, the budget's actually bigger than it used to be. This is ridiculous. It wasn't cut by 17 million. And even the chief in that video said, well, whether it was 7 million or 10 million, the bottom line is you have to look at line items for core operations. And the chief, I am going to go with the chief of the fire department on that issue. I'm not going to go with a budget analyst. I'm not going to go with a city administrator. I'm going to go with the chief. And if that chief says those line items that go to core operations and public safety have been reduced, I'm siding with the chief on that one.
As am I. And Bill, it's, your words really brought something to mind. When you juxtapose what Chief Crowley did with what Mayor Bass did in the airport, See, this is where you start building credibility. Who knows? Maybe Chief Crowley, maybe she's wrong. Maybe there's some erroneous information. But as consumers of news and information, what we know is this, that Chief Crowley was ready, willing, and able to put herself out front, right, for 15 minutes, unscripted, and answer every question that reporter posed to her, as opposed to the mayor, who's her boss, refused to say a word. So where do we put our credibility, or who do we put credibility in? And I think in both our cases, it's with the chief of the fire department. To that point about, putting out there and telling it, again, even if she's mistaken, even if she's not 100% accurate, she's telling you exactly what she believes. I'm talking about the chief of the fire department, LA City Fire Department. She's giving you her opinion to the best of her ability. And I think very honestly, whether or not you think she's wrong is a whole different story, but she's putting herself out there. To that point, Anthony, if you can pull up that second clip and this final clip from the fire chief from 12:18 to 12:24. Don't play it just yet. But this one, Bill, I think this is the one where you and I cringed, again, based on our experiences and our respective roles. So, Anthony, go ahead and play that one.
What they need to do their jobs, period.
Did the city of Los Angeles fail you and your department and our city?
It's my job to stand up as a chief and exactly say, justifiably, what the fire department needs to operate to meet the demands of the community.
Did they fail you?
That is our job. And I tell you, that's why I'm here. So let's get us what we need so our firefighters can do their jobs.
Did they fail you?
Yes.
So, Bill, I'm gonna take this one first. If you notice, the chief there, she did her best to, for the longest time that she could, to really deflect away from what she really wanted to say. And the reason I think that is because she knew that if she gave her true opinion, that it was going to attack the chain of command, and specifically in this case, the mayor, because the mayor is her direct boss. She reports to other people as well, but in the form of councils and things like that and boards. But when you're asked if the city failed you, and you say yes, you're saying my boss failed me. Now, the reason you and I cringed when we saw that is because that would be like me saying, really, ultimately, no, the governor failed the Highway Patrol, or in my case, it would be our commissioner of the Highway Patrol. Now, I may get on the phone and say, and my bosses know, I'd get on the phone and say, WTF are you thinking, boss? This is whatever. But if I go on the camera, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, hey, I'm doing what I got to do. I'm following the orders, and this is the mission of the Highway Patrol, and blah, blah, blah. You got any questions, you can call my boss. I'm not going to throw people under the bus in a public manner when you're still on the job. That's just the way it should go. But to her credit, my take on this, Bill, is that her frustration level was so high. I think, again, to her credit, it's like there's no option other than for me to tell the truth. They've already seen this endless number of memos that I've written. I've already said that the budget's been cut. We're suffering with the resources. I already warned that something we're dealing with now could happen. And I think she was smart saying, listen, they already know what I believe, so I'm going to come out and say it specifically. What's your take, Bill?
I think, well, first off, I think I would have been fired if I said that in my old position. Definitely, if not fired, definitely moved to a different position, without a doubt. I mean, that's a very strong statement. And could it have been said in a different way? Because here's the thing. There is a fine line, Mark, between, I guess what I'm saying is when you're someone like who I think Chief Crowley is, that's advocating for her people, right? It's pretty clear she's doing that here. If you're no longer the chief, you cannot advocate for your people. So there's a fine line between staying in position, managing your rhetoric, managing your statements to stay in a position where you can help your people, and just going scorched earth and putting it all out there and getting fired. And then the mayor puts quote, her person, unquote, in there, and the department goes downhill for the next 10 years because of that. So you have to be very, very careful of that. And I don't know, man, that I had heard a rumor that the chief was fired. It turns out she wasn't. But that's my take on that. I would have gotten fired for it, probably in interest of serving her people in the long term. She probably could have dialed that back a little bit and made it obvious what she was meaning without actually saying it.
Well, you make such a great point, Bill, about, in other words, you have to be there. You have to
be there to impact an organization. And if you go scorched earth, you ain't going to be there.
Yeah. And it's such a great point. And I hadn't considered that when I gave her props, and I still do, for being honest, but it's a very, very dangerous situation you put yourself in as far as, hey, do I want to help ultimately, or am I going to be gone? I will say this, that ironically, because the mayor is under so much pressure and scrutiny now, probably the last thing in the world politically that she can do is fire the fire chief who said the city failed me. In other words, it will probably now be political suicide, because it would simply look like, oh, you fired the person who said that we need more help. So I think it's quite a soap opera now, and I don't mean to be flippant about what's going on, but all of this. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Mark, but man, my fear is, does she become a scapegoat, Mark? Because they say she's not on the team. They look around the room and they say, she's not on the team. She's the one that's going to eat this one.
That's a possibility.
That's my fear. That's my fear with going all out like that.
And that's why I say you raise such a good point, and it's still a possibility that she could be gone.
And then, Mark, then who comes in? Because the mayor has already been burned once by a quote, I don't know, but by a what would you call that? Someone who's just supporting their people. I don't know. I mean, by a leader or by someone who's true to the people that they're leading. How about that? The mayor's been burned by that once. Who do you think's going to come in on the second go around?
Yeah, you know what? It's an open-ended question. I don't know. But it goes, when you see this type of really public fighting now, and it's not just between the chief and the mayor, because we're going to transition, from city here to the state. It's, in other words, it does not breed a sense of confidence, I think, from the public point of view, that we have, inconsistent statements and things like this. Look, and I didn't pull some of these articles up, but we've had, some people say, oh, there's plenty of water here, or the pumps were working, or the pumps weren't working. You have these conflicting statements, not too dissimilar from the statements we saw at the terrorist attack in New Orleans, where you have the mayor saying this is a terrorist attack, and then immediately after you have an FBI agent and ASAC saying this definitely was not a terrorist attack. It doesn't breed consistency. Does not breed confidence. I think in the public, where you have, especially here, where everybody's from the same city, and I'm talking about Palisades Fire, that people are not on the same page with the information they provide the public. So, and that seems to be the case when it goes from the city in conjunction with the state as well. There seems to be a little bit of controversy there. And again, as we go through this podcast, I want to keep restating my point here, and I know your point, Bill, is not to bring this down to some type of a soap opera level. Oh, look at this and blah, 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 and have fun finger pointing. That's not the point at all. The point is that everybody, from the governor to the brand new firefighter, LA City or LA County or anybody, everybody knew that the next wildfire is coming. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew. Everybody knows the next earthquake is coming. I mean, my God, the building codes in California now, especially, probably throughout California, but in the earthquake prone regions, which is most of it, are extraordinary. And why? Because they know the next earthquake is coming. So you have these building codes and on and on and on and on, because we don't know when it's going to happen. The same thing is true for the fire. So you would think if the building codes are this stringent, so robust, that the mitigation, because again, you cannot prevent the fires from happening, or most of them, a lot of them you cannot prevent, but you can mitigate the destruction. And that's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
What was the preparation and response like? So to that, one would think that the governor would, as you would think Mayor Bass would be prepared with a robust, clear, cogent statement, you would think that the governor and his staff would be prepared with statements of substance. And I say statements because these things are going to evolve from day to day, hour to hour. Pardon me. And there would be information to provide, positions to publicize, specific information about responses. It does not seem like Governor Newsom was much more prepared than Mayor Bass, in my opinion. And to that point, Anthony, let's go to clip number 4. And I think this is the day after. It might be maybe 36 hours. I can't remember exactly when, but it's on CNN. And this is Governor Newsom responding to a reporter's questions. Anthony, go ahead and play that entire clip.
What is the situation with the water? Obviously, in the Palisades, ran out last night in the hydrants. I was trying to firefighter on this block. They left because there was no water in the hydrant here.
The local folks are trying to figure that out. I mean, just when you have a system that's not dissimilar to what we've seen in other extraordinarily large-scale fires, whether it be pipe, electricity, or whether it just be the complete overwhelm of the system. I mean, those hydrants are typical for 2 or 3 fires, maybe 1 fire. You have something at this scale, but again, that's going to be determined by the local authorities.
Mark, can I say something to this? And I hate to, interrupt your train of thought, if you.
Oh no, please! I was going to give this to you anyway.
So here's the water situation, at least in the Palisades, right?
Mm-hmm.
The city is provided water by 3 1-million-gallon tanks, and they're at different altitudes, different elevations within the city. They pump water into the highest one, and then it uses gravity to flow that water down to the second one and down to the third one. The first tank ran out at about 4 in the afternoon, and the fire started at 10:30 in the morning on Tuesday. First tank ran out at 4 in the afternoon. Second tank ran out somewhere around 8 o'clock at night. Third tank, everything done, no more water in the city at about 3 in the morning the next morning. And you heard the governor there say something that I take issue with, where he's basically like it's a local problem. And I want to talk about some specifics. First, there is part of it that was a local problem, but I want to also get into some state of California issues that he's directly responsible for that caused this to happen. The first thing is there's a reservoir, Mark, that I know you're aware of, Santa Ynez Reservoir, but it's actually a reservoir in the Palisades, right? 117 million gallons of water in the Palisades. And what a reservoir is, I know a lot of our country outside of California, they get well water. They may not be super familiar with this. Think of it as a giant swimming pool, cement bottom. It's a man-made lake. There it is. Thank you, Anthony.
Yep.
117 million gallons. This reservoir was dry, completely dry and offline. The reason why is, as you see that picture there, when the reservoir is in operation, there's a membrane across the top of it, and that membrane keeps pollutants out. Bird crap, for example, things that might get in the water that would put a drain on the filtering systems or whatever. There was last February, so damn near a year ago, Mark, they identified a slit in the membrane, a couple feet long. They put it out for bid in April, so it took a couple months to get the bids out, and they expected the job to be, I don't know, like a $89,000 job, something like that. Last November, the bid was awarded, and it went up over 100 million, and the work hasn't even started yet.
100 million or 100,000?
I'm sorry, Mark. Over 100,000. Over $100,000. I don't remember. $130,000 was awarded to do the repair. the status of the repair is unclear right now. I don't know if the work's been started yet or not. The reservoir is still empty. The union says that type of work should be done in-house. Now, hey, I didn't have time to go look and see what company was awarded that contract and look into the contract and see maybe why that contract was awarded there. But there are experts that say this would have had an impact. It may not have. I'm not saying this would have put the fires out, but this would have definitely allowed more water, and that the hydrants could have been online for longer. So I think that's a super important fact. And then getting into the governor's responsibility. Mark, you lived in California in 2014. Do you remember Proposition 1 in 2014?
I do not remember the text.
So Proposition 1 in 2014 was to establish $2.7 billion for water storage projects. More than 10 years later, the projects have been held up by absurdly slow environmental review and planning process. We, as the voters in California, we approved this proposition. It was to store billions of gallons of water instead of letting it go out into the ocean. And I know, probably because of where that statement came from about water being sent out into the ocean, that everyone's hurt feelings about it. They say it's propaganda, whatever. I ask people just to go back and look at Prop 1 and to see what's been done. So it took 4 years just to establish the funding level for each of the 8 projects. One project was dropped. I don't know. I'm not clear how that happened. It then turned into 7 products. So here's where those 7 projects are today. And again, I bring this up because the governor said this is a local problem, but yet this is a California issue with water. The Harvest Water Project received its final funding, moving fast relative to the others, expected to be in operation sometime in 2027. So still another year and a half probably until they see any water from that. Willow Springs Water Bank should begin construction in 2026, come online in 2028. Still nothing done after 10 years. It'll be 12 years before they even break ground on it. Kern Fan Groundwater Water Storage Project. Start construction in 2025. This year, come online close to 2030. So we still have another 5 years to go on that one. Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion, still in permitting, should be permitted by 2027 and go online in 2031. I think that's 16 years, Denmark, or 17 years.
17 years.
17 years it'll take the government to get this project funded and built. Chino Basin Program expected to be operational around 2032. So another year on top of that. Sites Reservoir to begin construction in 26 or 27, should be operational in 2033. And finally, Pacheco Reservoir Expansion Project to begin construction in 2028 and go operational in 2035. Now, I'm not necessarily saying, Mark, that this is Gavin Newsom. What I'm saying is this is what you and I call big government. The government is not really capable of doing things efficiently and quickly. I'm saying that as someone who worked for the federal government for 32 plus years. And this is a great example of it. This is something that was passed in 2014, would have made a measurable difference had any of it really been online for this fire over the past couple of weeks. And we have yet to see one drop of water from this project.
Bill, again, this is one of the many reasons I'm so glad you're on today, because I knew you would bring the receipts. I knew you would bring the receipts with things like that. I didn't do any of that research. I did the research I did, but I said, Bill Bodner is going to bring in the documentation. This is so important. We don't know. We'll never know what amount of water or pumping resources, how much that would have mitigated the disaster. We don't know, but we do know this. More water is better than less when it comes to fighting fires. I mean, I think that most people can agree on this. This goes back, Bill, to what we talked about earlier in the LA City. Thanks, Anthony, for that image there. About core operations. You're talking about permitting process for reservoirs that will capture water for drinking, for agriculture, and for emergencies for fighting fires. And we're talking upwards of 20 plus years before some of these will come online. The last one that I did this research, Bill, I believe that the last reservoir in California was completed in 1979. That's what the 1979, the last one built. And now we're taking all of this time, all this red tape. And by the way, I don't have this clip, but Gavin Newsom now is out running around talking about all the red tape he's going to cut through to help all these people whose homes and livelihoods and memories are all incinerated. Now he's going to cut through red tape. And to your point also, this is not all Gavin Newsom. There are multiple governors in this process, including Republican governors, not 2014 moving forward, but going back to 1979, who also didn't get this job done. But it is one government. It is state government who did not get the job done, which goes to your other point about the inefficiency of government that you and I know so well.
And Mark, real quick, Mark, read the byline from this thing that Anthony just put up. Water Commission is ready, but project proponents control the schedule. And that's what we're talking about in the state of California. There has to be, environmental studies for everything.
It's so great, by the way, and this really does. This is like hand in glove to this next clip, because when you think about this, you think about, again, core operations, core mission, core purpose of government, whether it's local, county, state, or federal. There should be basic, specific, and few responsibilities of government. And one of those, especially at the local and state level, that is the protection of human life and property. Those really are the core missions of government, to make life better. In the meantime, we live in a state that we know is catching fire. I mean, God, you go back a few years to the Paradise Fire. That clip about Newsom. Well, you got to talk to the locals about this and about the fire hydrants.
That was the one in Northern California, Mark?
Northern California.
The biggest fire in the history of California.
To that point. I think now size-wise it still is, but it pales in comparison to the dollar amount and structure loss here in Los Angeles County. But you would think that the governor and other officials in California would have learned enough about what went wrong. And we could spend a whole nother show on forestry and I'm going
to bring that up, Mark. I'm sorry, this might be a long one. No. Anthony, go back down the bottom of that page, because this goes right here. I want to say the commission is carrying out the voters' intent. This is a quote from an article that Anthony just pulled up. We are anxious to fund the projects, quote, once the statutory requirements have been met. We look forward to seeing these projects deliver the public benefits associated with new water storage capacity so vitally needed in our state. Once the statutory requirements have been met. When, I don't know, Mark, maybe we have to get to a point where when a bill like this is passed, they look at those requirements, and I don't know if they waive them or they do something to make it so these projects can actually be completed timely.
Well, 100%, Bill, 100%. You know what it comes down to? It comes down to priorities. Here's example number one. The last 5 years, $24 billion vanished in the effort to mitigate the homeless problem in the state. See, that was a priority, technically a priority, because the homeless problem's only gotten worse. But it was very easy to spend $24 billion. And again, we don't know where it is. It's lost. Governor Newsom can't tell us where it went. Nobody can tell us where it went. They had hearings in the California legislature. We don't know where, but for whatever reason, that was a political priority, and that money was spent. We don't know where it went. It evaporated. So when people in elected or appointed bureaucratic positions want to do something, oh my God, it can be done. We know it can be done. This is all smoke and mirrors. It was not a priority. I'm sorry. It's just not been a priority. Otherwise, these things would have been addressed. And I'm going to give you an example, because I'm so glad, again, you got more receipts about forestry problems here. But let me play this one. Anthony, we'll play the whole one. This is an ad from Gavin Newsom, clip number 5, Anthony. Take a look at this and tell me where his and most of state government's priorities lie. Go ahead and play it, Anthony.
So we're here at the Iron Gate Fish Hatchery, right on the edge of the Klamath River, next to one of the dams that will be removed, the largest dam removal project in U.S. history, and one of the most significant, if not the most significant, water restoration project, bringing back salmon and steelhead into this basin. This project could not have happened without extraordinary partnerships with tribal nations and, of course, our partners in the North and Oregon. We just finished a celebration with the Secretary of the Interior and our tribal council and tribal leaders, and I couldn't be more proud as a Californian, and I couldn't be more proud as a father, because my kids and their great-great-grandkids will have the opportunity to see something that, well, has been here since time immemorial, and it's about damn time we got this done.
Yeah, it's about damn time that all that water is going into the Pacific Ocean. That water, unless by some extraordinary means the dams are rebuilt, which I don't think it's ever going to happen, all that water will not be going into reservoirs. It will not be available for pumps. It will never be available for firefighting efforts. It will never be available for irrigation. That water is gone. Just by the way, and I know you're going to get into this, Bill, but like 95% of all the rain that falls, all the snowpack that accumulates in the Sierra Nevadas, 95% of it ends up in the Pacific Ocean. Why? Because, as you so well articulated, California has been delinquent in building infrastructure to capture the water. California receives all the water it needs every year or every other year or every few years in order to sustain droughts if they would just capture it, but California does not. He was absolutely giddy about blowing up these dams, destroying them, demolishing these dams in an effort to have a salmon swim upstream. I wonder if he had been as giddy if this water had been accumulated, had been stored in order to fight and mitigate some of these fires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the water retention and accumulation is a huge issue, and it, I read a lot of statements by experts. It can't be quantified, right? You and I or any expert can't say what a difference this would have made in the fire, but they all agree that it would have had some impact because, like you said, water is a basic staple if you're going to fight a fire.
100%.
And by the way, it wasn't just in the Palisades. I saw statements from Cal Fire that at least 4 hydrants were dry in Altadena, and I'm sure it was more than that. That was just from one. That was from one individual that said he saw 4 hydrants go dry.
Well, there's no doubt, and I'm lucky. I'm still close enough to the state where I have some contacts, and I'm pretty confident that some of the water, some of the pumps. Could have been online. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. They certainly should have, and they could have been online in that Eaton fire.
And Mark, a good point, because even in the Palisades fire, the story I heard was that so they're pumping water up to the highest tank in the Palisades, right? Mm-hmm. They had to stop that because they had to the people working the pumps had to be evacuated. That was the story that I heard, and I heard that from not whispers or anything. That was reported in the news media that they had to be evacuated and the pumping stopped. So,
yeah, this thing, and I want you to get into. I'm really excited, Bill, to hear your take, your information, the receipts you brought about forest fire, really mitigation. But all these things. Well, the tanks ran out. We couldn't. No one could conceive of such. Devastation or the combination of the winds. And again, you and I most definitely understand that these, even given California's history of wildfires, that these circumstances, these conditions were extraordinary. There's no doubt about it. They were above and beyond pretty much what anybody's ever seen. But that does not mean that you don't do everything in preparation to be there if this or something worse happens in the future. You don't know. And that's why, again, it comes down to core mission, core operation. To your point about the tanks and the people having to evacuate the actual pumping stations, this is this really is amazing to me, because these are the things that obviously have not been considered or prepared for. In other words, gee, what if the fire causes our operators to have to evacuate?
Right.
In other words, you'd want to put these stations, these whatever, I don't know what they look like, but wherever these pumps are located or being controlled from, you think you'd want them in the most remote area possible, from a fire. You'd want as many tanks online as possible. You'd want as many reservoirs as possible. It just does not seem that it was done.
Yeah. Yeah. So the vegetation, Mark, the
Yes.
forest management. And hey, I can speak probably specifically a little more toward the fire on the west side. You lived on the east side there, so maybe you can talk about that. But what first caught my eye on this was Rick Caruso. He was a candidate for mayor, city of Los Angeles, this past go around. He's a big property owner in the Palisades, right? Owns a lot of property in the Palisades. He says his recollection or his statement is that there's been no control of the vegetation there for 30 to 40 years. No like deforestation, no cleaning up of fuel, of fire fuel. Now, one of the techniques used to address that is called prescribed burns or controlled burns. And that's when fire authorities go in at the right time of year, the right conditions, and they actually burn, let's call them fire breaks. They burn some of the fuel up so that if a fire starts, it's not going to spread, exponentially or astronomically like this one did. Michael Wara, he's a Stanford professor. He says there are 2 times of year when it's safe to do burns: right before the rain starts and right after they end. Now, the rainy season for us here in LA, Mark, is what you would say January, February, March.
Yeah, I'd probably say February
December?
into April. Yeah,
Okay.
but January's fair.
So generally, the end of the calendar year is when some of these burns would be done, right? When some of these prescribed or controlled burns would be done. This past October, and I'm going to bring the federal government in on this now, Mark. This past October, the United States Forest Service said they were halting controlled burns for the foreseeable future to preserve staff to preserve staff and equipment for wildfires. This was noted in October as a move that could increase long-term fire risks. Okay. Now, for those who don't know, the federal government's budget year begins October 1st. There was a continuing resolution this year. As someone who worked for the government, I've already said it a number of years, that when you operate under a continued resolution, you really have to conserve. You're only funded at 80% of what you got the previous year because they don't know what the final budget's going to be. So they're, if there's, they kind of keep that, let's say 20% cut as a potential. So let's say, October, one year we got $10 million. There's a continuing resolution now. We're only going to get 8. Now, down the road, when a budget's passed, we're going to get like back pay, think of it. We're going to get that money made up for. But it causes things like this to happen early in the fiscal year because there's no money to do them. Wara says, this is the Stanford professor, however, he says that this is risk aversion by the federal government. If they make a mistake in a prescribed burn, they are liable. So if they're doing a controlled burn and it gets out of control, there's liability. If they do nothing, Mark, there's no liability.
Interesting.
And they traded the risk on controlled burns for that they would be responsible for the risk of greater wildfires, which they would not be responsible for. And they also, they had a bunch of reasons why they did it. They said they were busy responding to emergencies outside the region. They were shorthanded, etc. Anthony, if you can put that map up of the, I think it's PFIRS. It's the prescribed fire index or something like that. So when you do a controlled burn in California, you basically have to get a permit like everything else. So there's actually a record that of every controlled burn that's been done in the state and who's done it. In the past 5 years in the Palisades area, now it's going to be kind of tough to see where that is. If you see, right. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, if you see the L in Los Angeles in the middle of the map right there,
the
area directly left to that out to the ocean, right there where that cursor is,
Yep.
That is where the Palisades fire is. It's burned now from the bottom, almost from the left side of that letter L. It's burned all the way to the ocean in part. And so there's been no controlled burns in that area in the past 5 years by any agency. Okay. Now, in the area where you used to live, Mark, there's been 6 burns in the past 5 years that I count in the Eaton Fire area. Only one. Now, 5 of them were in 2020 and 2021. And since that time, there was one in January 2024. And now you'll notice there's a different color code there. Really, the only ones in LA County that have been done have been green, and that is the United States Forest Service, right? They're the only people that have done controlled burns in LA County. So
and by the way, and that's because those are national forests. They have a different jurisdiction than the state of California. Is that correct?
That's correct. So when they stop doing them, none get done. Now, I want to point out, Orange County, I see yellow and I see red, or actually that's Riverside. So that's going to be CAL FIRE doing burns. That's going to be local fire officials doing burns. In San Bernardino County, I see yellow, I see orange. Again, that's local authorities doing it. In LA County, all you see is green. And as I said, that stopped this past November. They publicly said that they're not doing it. This kind of goes to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. And this limits the ability of the government to clear dead trees and vegetation. So there are very strict rules about creating pollution, which these burns do. And again, when you saw the governor, now he didn't speak specifically to this, or if he did, Mark, I haven't seen it. It wasn't in that clip that you just played. That was specifically about water, where he said, hey, that's a local thing. But there was a bill, AB 2330. And just so I get what that was, the name of that bill was like wildlife preparedness. I'm sorry, wildfire, not wildlife, wildfire preparedness. On 9/22, on September 22nd of 24, he vetoed that bill on his desk. Okay. And what that bill would have done, it would have given some exemptions from CEQA to do these controlled burns.
And Bill, forgive me, what year was that again? He vetoed it?
It was 5 months ago, Mark.
Okay, that's what I'd say.
5 months ago, it was September 22nd, 2024. He says, I am returning this bill without my signature. And he goes, the taking of threatened or endangered species as part of their wildlife preparedness plan. I'm sorry, I keep saying wildlife.
Yeah.
Wildfire preparedness planning efforts. That was his concern.
Threatened species?
Yeah. So,
like the Delta smelt.
Well, it might be. I don't know. But for him to kind of brush all that off. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bill would require the Department of Fish and Wildlife to develop and implement a program to assist local governments with the taking of threatened or endangered species as part of their wildfire preparedness planning efforts. He's not down with that. Yeah. So he vetoed that. Now, there's been other ones. Let's see, what else here? AB 1951, Mark, real quick. So the state said, so people said, hey, at least within 50 feet of a roadway, can we get an exemption? Within 50 feet of a roadway, if we want to remove brush, do controlled burns, et cetera, can we do it? And that one dead in committee. So there's been several, without getting into the nuances of each one, there's been several things that people have tried to do in the state of California to better prepare for wildfire. That one we just talked about, vetoed in the past 4 months. And others just died in committee. And Anthony brought up a great article about it right here. Yeah. Now, Anthony, when's that article from? Is that now current, looking back? No, see, that's September. That's right when that's the day that it was, or the 5 days after he vetoed the bill. Mm-hmm. And that was and Mark, look who wrote that bill. A Pasadena Assembly members bill.
Oh, yeah.
There's the fire, Mark.
Right there. The irony is overwhelming. In
so
general,
think about that. I'm sorry, Mark, but this gets me so. There's an assemblyman in the area of the Eaton fire today that said, I'm going to do what's right. I put this bill out there. It's voted on. It's passed, Mark. The California legislature passed it. The governor vetoed it. And then what happens just 4 months later in that assemblyman's district? You tell me, where you used to live.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, it's the Eaton fire. It primarily destroyed Altadena, but it got deep into Pasadena as well. But the irony is crazy. And again, that's one elected official I happen to know personally and worked with. But again, it's not because he is prophetic. It's because it's happened before. It's going to happen again. And the people that he specifically represents, Holden, are the ones that are most likely to be the victims. And so he's trying to be proactive there and get this through. These, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but these should be the core missions of government. It is protection of human life, not of a bait fish in the Sacramento Delta or some other species. We don't want to be part of having a species go extinct for no reason. But when it comes down to one or the other, these things should be streamlined. An endangered species compared to the value of human life and, yes, human property should be far, far, far subordinate, and they should not be an impediment to getting these bills passed, and the governor should not be vetoing them.
Yeah, and Anthony's highlighting a real key part of this. This is AB 2330, which the governor vetoed. By prioritizing support for our fire services through expedited permitting for wildfire preparedness activities, AB 2330 would have enhanced our ability to respond to the growing challenges posed by wildfires adjacent to the residential neighborhoods. Now, I want to remind people, what I'm reading is not something that was written today. It was written 4 months ago, Mark. This veto is a setback for public safety, our communities, and preventing the next wildfire calamity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when the governor says, Mark, 100-mile-an-hour winds, it was these crazy winds. There's nothing no one could do anything about this. It was just the winds. It takes fuel. Now, hey, I get it. These winds were unbelievable. But the magnitude of this calamity, as it was called in this article, or the magnitude of this disaster was magnified by the lack of forest management or the lack of brush management. And that's why we had a lack of brush management. The federal government stopped the burns, and the city and state just can't apparently do them because of all the regulatory issues.
Well, Bill, to your point, we made it before. We have to keep making it that with these coupling of circumstances and elements with the fire and with the wind and the dry conditions, the fire was going to burn. But we said earlier, more water is better than less water, and less fuel is better than more fuel. These are the things that you do as an elected official to the best of your ability. You cannot prevent everything. We understand that. But you can mitigate. And even if you can't mitigate it, you can still make the effort because you don't know what your effort's going to lead to. You are sworn to do these things, and it's absolutely disgrace that they did it. The controlled burns bill, it's very interesting because, here in the panhandle of Florida where I live, and we're a mile from the Gulf of Mexico, most beautiful beaches in the world. But we are adjacent to a state forest. I mean, it's even when we first came down here, it was kind of like, hey, well, the water's right there, and it's a forest here. And of course, we're flat. It's not like California where you actually have topography. Pardon me for coughing here. It is flat. I think the highest point in Florida is 300 feet. But we are adjacent to a huge state forest, and then it goes north and it goes into Alabama, about 40 minutes north of us. They had a major fire here a few years ago. In fact, the house where I'm in right now, we bought the lot here, and this lot burned in that fire a couple of years before we moved here. However, the county here in which we live, they do a great job of ongoing, continuous controlled burns. The point is that they didn't prevent that fire. And by the way, there were a number of homes that burned in that fire. They didn't prevent those homes from burning. But what we don't know is how many homes they did prevent from burning because of all the controlled burns they do. They do them on a regular basis. Matter of fact, in the midst of watching the coverage here the other day, I was in my living room. I'm watching the news. I'm watching Altena. I'm watching Palisades. I'm like, God, I think this was 2 or 3 days ago. 3 days ago. And I said, oh, I got to take the trash out. I walked outside and opened my door, and woof, there is a huge plume of smoke. I mean, bad. And I actually, my heart started racing because what I've been watching for a couple of days at that point, I'm watching Southern California go up in flames. And then I see this huge plume of smoke. And then I realized in about 5 seconds, oh my God, that's a controlled burn down in so-and-so, city a couple miles away. They're doing these things piecemeal to mitigate probably the fire that is coming here to this county, in this region. It's probably a fire coming. But these are the proactive things they do on a regular basis. And by the way, the alert systems here, the evacuation systems here, they may not work perfect when it comes, but we're constantly being updated with more information. I mean, constantly being updated with information about preparedness. So again, we go back to not wanting to point fingers and things like this, but damn it, things could have been done that were not done. That's the bottom line, that government did not fulfill its core mission.
Right.
And by the way, I don't mean for this to be the end. If you have more information there, I want to hear about more bills if we have them. So have that.
The only thing I'll say is a state. Let me make sure I find out who I'm talking about here. The representative of California's 63rd Assembly District. I don't know. I want to say that may be out in the Corona area. I don't know about that. I could be wrong about that. He tweeted something this morning saying that that California has cut their. Let me get it right. What he said, and we can maybe see if there's any accuracy to it. They slashed. He says that California has slashed wildfire prevention 80% down to 200 million. Now, I don't know he is a politician. I would think he has some credibility and knows what he's talking about. I don't know, Anthony, if you were able to find any, like what numbers he's relying on to say that, or before we move on.
And we can come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, man, to say that the wildfire prevention was slashed by 80% in California. I mean, that's
over what period of time?
I know, over what period of time, and that's a very substantial number.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what period of time, and I raise that. I mean, if it's halfway true, it's egregious.
His name is Bill Essayli, Essayli. And it was, he mixes it in with some other issues, Mark, on what they're spending money on.
Well, this goes to my point again about where the tax money goes.
Yeah.
And Anthony, while you're looking that up, we'll see if you can find something on that. But Bill, I do want to touch on this as well, because this, obviously, post incident, we're not out of it yet. Unfortunately, here we are expecting more wins coming up here soon. But the insurance side of it.
Oh yeah.
I want to talk about this. We lived in that house you saw at the beginning of this, and we'll come back to it because Anthony found something there.
Okay.
I believe.
Gavin Newsom, this is Newsweek magazine. So this was a big talking point over the past several days. And Governor Newsom, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, called this fake news. And he actually had a meeting with Biden, which was somewhat troubling for me to hear the soundtrack of, where he said, hey, we need to stop this fake stories coming out. Now, that's Newsweek.
Yeah.
Can you put that up again, Anthony? Or
yeah.
I'm sorry, Vince. Can you put that up again? And right there was the article. Newsom cuts $100 million from. I don't know. And again, it's.
Well, you take me to another thought here. There it is, right there. There's this whole quote unquote misinformation. This mindset about misinformation. And long story short, I've been on some social media talking to people, and we need to fix the misinformation about this. The point is, like you said, Bill, this is from Newsweek. Love them or hate them. I'm not a huge fan of Newsweek, but we can't call them like a discredited publication or entity. They provide a lot of good information. The thing is, I would think that we would want as much information as possible, and then we can start dissecting it and do our own research and things like this. I don't want limited information. If there's erroneous information put out there, eventually it's going to be identified as erroneous information. But the more information that's available, I think that we get a better feeling of actually what's going on, what's happened, what can be done in the future. And that's the most important thing. What lessons can we learn? I don't think anyone's going to argue that the wildfire mitigation efforts in California have been going the right direction. I just think that's probably an absurd position.
Right.
But I'm willing to hear from anybody and everybody about what's being done and what's not, because we need to do our best not to have this happen again. Now, I do want to touch on this about the insurance companies and insurance cancellation. The insurance companies, I won't even give you my opinion. The insurance companies have been attacked by any number of individuals and groups and entities and things like this. They've been attacked for being heartless, and I mean, it's just a fact. And I'll tell you from a personal point of view. Again, I lived there. I was in a high fire risk zone. By the way, you talk about irony. I was the last house on that street that was in that zone. Our friends to the west of us, that house that went down, they were outside of the high risk zone. Wow. They were considered a different risk than we were. Their house burned, our old house didn't. You just talk about fate. But here's the thing. We lived there for 7 years. We lived there for 7 years. And in the 7 years that we lived there, our homeowners insurance, because it included fire insurance, of course, was canceled twice. I had 3 different insurers in the 7 years that we lived there. My insurance premiums rose by 350% in the 7 years that we lived there. And look, like them or love them, insurance companies are in business to make a profit. If they receive $1 million, I'm just using, easy, hard numbers that even I can understand. If they receive $1 million in premiums, and every year they have to pay out $1.5 million in claims, they cannot survive.
Right.
That's reality. You can call them evil, call them whatever. Listen, if McDonald's franchise is making $1 million a month in gross revenue, and they're paying out $1.1 million, that franchisee is going to go out of. I'm sorry, this is so simple economics. The problem here is that these insurance companies have been doing just this. They've been losing money over the years in the last, especially 10, 15, 20 years with these fires. They've been losing more and more money, and they're having to cut their losses. When you look at the number of fires, and this is all public information, and when you look at Southern California Edison, and you look at Pacific Gas and Electric in Northern California that have been sued because of fires that they have been attributed to have responsible for faulty equipment. There are lawsuits still going on for loss of life, loss of property. The insurance companies, and by the way, to the great information you provided, Bill, about the lack of forest fire threat mitigation, these CEOs and board of directors are looking and say, wait a minute, we are taking enormous risk for our livelihood if we stay in these markets. We will go out of business. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors, to our stockholders. We have to make a profit or we don't survive. Now, it doesn't mean that some of these insurance companies are not, I don't know, maybe they're gouging or whatever, but they have to make a profit. And they're saying, you know what? We cannot insure people in this zone because they're going to bankrupt us, and they had to make a decision to drop them. So a lot of these people in California lost their homes with mortgages still on them, and they weren't insured because they couldn't afford the insurance premium, or they got canceled and they could not find another carrier in time to get insured before these fires. You talk about a nightmare upon a nightmare. This is what a lot of people are experiencing.
The other thing I've heard, Mark, is that, well, first off, you bring up a good point that the insurance business is risk management, right? I think one thing that we haven't mentioned here for people that don't live in this area, the past 2 years have been, I should say, probably 2023, the rainy season of 22-23, extremely wet, record number, a record snowfall up in the whatever you call it, the mountains,
Sierra Nevada.
Snowpack, yeah, record rainfall down here. But right now there has been no rain since April, and now we're in January, right? So what happens is you have 2 years of heavy rain. All the vegetation grows. I mean, LA is a beautiful place. Everything is green. It's growing. And then you have no rain for, what's it been now? 7 months?
10 months. Oh,
10
longer
months?
than, yeah, something like that.
9 months, whatever.
Yeah, 9 months, yeah.
Everything dries out, and you have a super abundance of this fuel that we've talking about. And you hear October that the Forest Service is not doing any more controlled burns. The insurance companies pay people a lot of money to identify and manage risk. They see this problem on the horizon, Mark, and they say, exit strategy. We got to get out of this market because they know there's going to be a huge event. It's just a question of when. And my thing is, if the insurance companies could predict this, if they could predict this increase in risk and manage their business accordingly, and I get it, it's people don't like to hear that, but really that's what they did. Why couldn't our government do that? Why didn't our government look at those same factors and say, oh my God, we're about to have a big fire incident? Because the insurance companies knew and took action. Why? Because their bottom line matters. Our federal government, our state government did not. Because why? There's no bottom line with firefighting, right? There's no bottom line with this mitigation of the fire threat.
100%, Bill.
Yeah,
it's 100%.
And Mark, have you heard this? It's about reinsurance. Have you heard the discussion about reinsurance?
I have not. With that phrase,
Anthony or Vince, could you look for this and maybe you find something real quick? But I guess one of the issues that in areas of high risk, somehow these insurance companies are able to lay off that risk. They're able to insure themselves, and they pass that cost on to the customers. In California, the government said, no, you cannot reinsure. You cannot reinsure and pass that cost off to the customers. And what happened was, they said, well, then we can't tolerate the risk if we can't lay it off, and they canceled policies. And now I believe there's been a change, and they are now, just in the past month or so, after this all started coming out about canceled policies, they are now allowing companies to lay off that risk. What can we make of this here? To allow reinsurance and rate making. See, December 30th, too late.
Wow, too late.
Right?
And Bill, and I did hear about that. I didn't remember that phrase, but I do remember this about them discussions. Basically, allowing the insurance companies to raise their rates in California was quashing that, and so the insurance company said, "Well, then we can't stay in the market."
Yeah. So I want to, I don't know. There's a fine line here. I'm not advocating on either side of it, right? Because I'll be the first to say there's a lot of corporate greed out there, but what I do have to say is, in my opinion, they didn't just cancel these policies for no reason. They canceled them because it didn't make sense in their risk portfolio because of the regulations in California, right? Because of regulation in California and because of the increased fire risk on the horizon, they said, we're out.
Yeah, Bill, that's exactly right. People have to remember, the insurance companies, like any other business, want you to pay them. They want you to pay them. So when they cancel your policy, you have to wonder, well, why? Why do they not want my money from me? Because, like you said, they have done the analysis, they've done the research, they've made their predictions, and they prepare to protect themselves, unlike, I think, California did.
Yep.
They did not prepare. The old saying is, if it's predictable, it's preventable. They predicted that there would be a massive loss like this. So he said, nope. And they protected themselves. So they prevented themselves from losing all this money. And meanwhile, now these people who were uninsured are in such a position I can't even imagine, without that coverage.
No, and I mean, it's going to affect everybody. And this isn't what anyone, listen, I didn't lose my house, Mark, and I'm not.
And neither did I. Yes.
Yeah. And thank God. And I'm not, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, though, something like this will affect everybody because these people they're probably going to be made whole somehow, and that's a lot of money to come from somewhere. That's all I'm saying, right? That's a lot of money to come from somewhere, and then so this particular, the insurance change in the law, December 30th. Again, too late. The policies had already been canceled, and then finally, I saw something else that I thought was just annoying or frustrating on insurance. The insurance commissioner for California released a statement or did a press release. He's prohibiting now companies from canceling policies for the next 6 months. Mark, where's there going to what could possibly burn in California in the next 6 months that hasn't burned yet? In other words, I'm saying, like, okay, you can't cancel policies for 6 months. That's not going to help anybody right now. That's really not going to help anybody.
It's not going to help anybody. No. And I would like to find out, I'm sure that'll be challenged in court. The idea that you tell a business how to run,
That's a great point. You're forcing the business to provide a service.
Correct.
That they can argue probably is, a negative,
there you go.
Cancel or renew policies. Okay, of victims. Well,
yes,
that does make sense. But if you're already a victim, I mean, I guess that's the point I was trying to make a minute ago, Mark.
You can't. Yeah, you can't count.
But if you're already a victim, it already happened. Like how is now? Okay, so good. You get to keep your fire insurance on your burned out place. Like, I'm not clear on who that's. Can someone explain that to me there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, in other words, have companies in the past somehow voided policies after the fact? I certainly doubt it, but I don't know. I've never been in that situation. I'm not sure what it means either. But it certainly indicates the complete disaster, pardon the use of the word, that this entire thing is in California. It should not be like this. All of these things these insurance companies are afraid of can and should have been mitigated. Again, it's not zero risk. Otherwise, insurance companies wouldn't have a market. There has to be a risk that someone's trying to mitigate in order to pay an insurance company. So you can't get rid of all the risk, but you can certainly reduce it. You can mitigate it. There's a reason, by the way, that my insurance tripled. It more than tripled over 7 years. Again, that was 3 different providers. It's because these insurance companies, like you said, Bill, they did risk analysis, and the risk kept getting higher and higher and higher. And by the way, when the Paradise Fire happened, there's Paradise Fire, and there's a couple other huge ones. I can't remember the names right now. Mm-hmm. Like you said, it affects everybody. That's another reason that my insurance premiums went so high, because I was covering the losses of those other policyholders. Mm-hmm. That's the way it works. So, and we will see what happens. I will say this: if this doesn't open the eyes of people in California, and again, this is not a partisan statement, I promise, but it is a government statement. If people don't understand how incompetent and how inept that local and county and state government is in California right now, literally, in my opinion, nothing will. When these fires broke out, and certainly when we saw the devastation in our old neighborhood there, my wife and I were in the living room just watching, and we were just all these streets that we know, and are riding bicycles and running and hiking, all these canyons that are burned to a crisp. She pointed, my wife pointed, she goes, "Mark, that's why we left." Mm-hmm. And
Mm-hmm.
she didn't mean specifically the fires, of course. We knew we lived under tremendous fire risk. We knew the whole
Right.
time we were there. We loved it. It was paradise otherwise. We knew what risk we're living in. She was talking about the management of the people responsible to mitigate these risks. That's what she meant, because that's why we love. She was talking about it because we did talk about it afterwards, and she expanded on her point. That's what she was talking about. And those are the fires there. We see them. Thanks for that, Anthony or Vince, putting that up there. But Bill, I want to end on this, and unless there's another specific topic you wanted to hit on.
No, just along the lines of insurance though, because there was one more thing that I saw.
Please.
And I don't know if, of course, I can't find it right now, but if Anthony or Vince could find this, there's something in California called insurance of last resort, and so you can get fire insurance, right? If your policy gets canceled, you could get some kind of fire insurance called insurance of last resort. But I want to say right now, and I don't want to give the numbers from my recollection because they might not be accurate, but I saw, here we go, a ticking time bomb. This is what I was getting at. You look at their liabilities versus their solvency. Let's see if they show numbers in here. Let's see. I don't know. I'll keep going down. I see the fair now requires 320 billion worth. Okay, so now what they're saying is California is going to actually become the insurer of $320 billion worth of property. Mark, do you want them managing that risk portfolio? Yeah, because there's only 100 million or something in assets.
Did you hear me laughing?
Yeah, a 320 billion compared to the FAIR plan has a $2 million surplus and 2.5 billion in reinsurance. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it just struck me as something that's actually the wording in this article is great, ticking time bomb, because when I saw the potential liability versus how much money this particular fund had, I said, wow, this is an issue, because I don't know even what claims they're going to be getting from these fires, but there was not enough cash to even support that.
Well, we're looking at, if I remember correctly, this is a couple of days ago. There was an estimate, and forgive me, someone please, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, whatever, but it was in the billions. I believe they were estimating 12 or 13 billion dollars of uninsured loss at this point with these two major, again, I think there's like 5 or 6 fires, but around $12 billion of uninsured losses. And so when you think about the whole thing, what is it now up to? I forget what it is now. 60 billion or something.
Yeah, I thought I saw 58 billion.
Basically $60 billion of losses now. It's extraordinary. And by the way, I'm glancing down here because I'm reading the text that you sent here, this post here on X with Bill Saley, how you pronounce his name. I'm reading that here. And I'm watching his interview a little bit, but this is extraordinary. And to our point, and I'll just read it here for the audience, what it says here. This is from, he's an assemblyman, I believe, right?
Yep.
A state representative. Yeah. Democrats insist on spending over $5 billion a year on illegal immigrant health care. And again, illegal immigrant health care, while they slash wildfire prevention 80% down to $200 million. This should disgust every Californian, especially those impacted by the ongoing wildfire disaster in Los Angeles. To my point, if this does not change, there it is right there. Thanks, guys, putting it up. And people can go back and listen to that and watch it for themselves. But if this does not change the minds or at least severely influence the thought process of California citizens, I don't know what will. I'm telling you right now, I don't care. I don't care what party they're from or what they look like, or I don't care. But if Karen Bass cannot answer questions on a tarmac to a reporter in the most basic rudimentary way, if Gavin Newsom says, well, you got to talk to the locals about the fire hydrants, if they are blowing up dams that have water that can mitigate these fires, or if they're not clearing dead wood, if they're not clearing dead brush, if they're not doing controlled burns, if they're not doing fire breaks, they're not doing their jobs, ladies and gentlemen. They are not providing the services that you in California, who pay upwards, the top end of you, up to 14% now almost, I think, of your state taxes. They're not taking that money and doing what they're supposed to do. They decide to spend $5 million a year on healthcare for illegal aliens.
Billion.
That did I say million? Yeah. $5 billion a year. That may be your thing. You may think it's a moral thing to do. You may be in complete support of that. Meanwhile, there's not $5 billion going to, that's $5 billion not going to prevent the type of utter hellish disaster that we've seen the last week in Southern California. I think it's a travesty. I think it's a dereliction of duty. I think it's immoral. I think it's absolutely unbecoming people who represent the second largest city in the country and the largest state in the country. I think it's despicable. I do want to finish up with this, Bill, and this will be the last thing that we watch. This, by the way, it's about a 4-minute clip. I think it's important for everybody to watch this. This is the owner of the Los Angeles Times, an iconic newspaper, one with which I rarely agree when it comes to op-eds. But it's an important point. I think most people would agree this is not a this publication, let's put it this way, is not someone who is historically, or is not one that's historically in contradiction with current California state politics. I think it's fair to say. So I think it's really important to watch this. This is an interview with the owner of Los Angeles Times, and this was from News Nation. I hope you watch this all the way through. It's really important. I think it kind of sums up what Bill and I have been talking about. Anthony, go ahead and play that clip.
With us now, owner and executive chairman of the Los Angeles Times, Dr. Soon Shiong, Dr. Patrick Soon Shiong, whose paper just today released an explosive investigative report on how ill-prepared Los Angeles was for these devastating wildfires. They report, quoting now, Pacific Palisades Reservoir was offline and empty when the firestorm exploded. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you. Never is local news reporting and important reporting needed more in times like this. When your team of reporters brought you this, that the reservoir was offline and empty, what was your response?
That it's so crazy that we have leaders that are reactive rather than proactive. I mean, it really emphasizes what I tweeted yesterday about issues of competence. And I think that's when we're really concerned. We don't elect people with great operational competence.
It's never when one thing goes wrong, it's when multiple things goes wrong. We argued last night that what we are seeing is not a failure, but is a success of policies, that the policies that were put in place have led to these events. Is that pretty much how you see it as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, right, there's really no surprise that we would have fires. In fact, we lived through a fire just a couple of years ago. So the idea that, for example, we don't create fire breaks, we actually reduce the budget. We actually don't inspect the hydrants. Apparently there's another, we'll be doing this investigation of a valve that actually could have actually increased the pressure, the absence of water in the reservoirs. Now you hear all these excuses, and I just heard this excuse about disinformation. I mean, I think that's outrageous when you have thousands of acres burning and 10 people are dead, so at least. So yes, I think the policies were misplaced. We have to ask our questions, where are we spending the money and why? And what is the sort of planning and the logistics skill sets of actually preparing ahead for this?
$20 billion spent by Governor Newsom on the homeless problem, if you will, their projects in California. The homeless rates went up. I say this respectfully because the best defense against incompetence and these kinds of policies is local news, is tough reporting and asking hard questions and not buying into the policies, certainly not of one-party rule, either Republican or Democrat. Is you're now looking back at how the LA Times operated, say, over the past 5 or 6 years, are you seeing that you all miss stories as well?
Well, I got into a little trouble, as I sort of pointed out, prior to the election, when I blocked, apparently, accordingly, blocked the endorsement of Vice President or President-elect or President wanted to be Kamala Harris. And I think what we have really was a state and now even a organization that was very progressive. And again, I'll get into trouble for that, where we have basically groupthink.
At the paper.
At the paper, at the opinion section, and so I needed to have really what I call critical thought, and to sort of bring it. Now with this event, we really must investigate, and that's really the basis of the paper, speaking truth to power, and really investigating the root cause of all these issues and making sure that this doesn't happen again.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com.
I found that clip this morning, and I don't think that I could have said it better. It was pretty clear. It's incompetence, and that was a couple of days ago. Of course, the death toll is up to, I want to say 24 people, I believe, as the recording today. But that's it for me, Bill. I really am going to give you the last word on this because, as usual, you've been such a great rudder in the water and bringing the receipts. I'm just so proud and privileged to have you on the show. So go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. The only thing I'll say is I hope that we take action this time. There's been efforts, and we talked about those efforts, and it hasn't really gone anywhere, and things haven't happened timely. I hope that this gets everyone on the same page, and that we can make progress here in Southern California and prevent something like this from ever happening again.
Amen to that, brother. And sincerely, my thoughts and prayers are with everybody out there. I have so many close ties. We're sending money to friends out there now, and God bless every single person affected by this. We wish the best, as you said, Bill, for everybody, and that this never happens again. For your illumination, I am the Chief Mark Garrett with Bill Bodner today, retired SAC, LA Field Office, DEA. Thank you. Subscribe, share, and watch as much as you can. It helps all of us get the word out there. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.